Good afternoon, business management team. I'm here this afternoon to talk to you a bit more about decision trees. I know you've had many questions in class, which is terrific, and it's often one of those topics in the IB Business Management course which poses some challenge to students. So you're not on your own if you're feeling a little overwhelmed with business management tools, particularly these 1.7 HL tools. Okay, let's get underway so we are well and truly prepared for our IB question that will sit on Monday. Okay, so I'm just going to take you to this presentation here. We understand that there's 4 tools in the organisational planning tools unit for 1.7. We are going to just focus on decision trees today, but next week we'll certainly pick up the remaining tools. Now, just in the lead up to your exam, please note that Gantt charts will not be examined in the Term 1 exam. Okay, that's something we're not going to ask you about at this stage, and this is Gantt charts will come up in your IA, so they're more relevant for our IA later this year. Okay, let's get underway with decision trees. So what we've covered in class, as you're aware, the first thing with any decision tree, it's important that we include a key. Okay, it's the very first thing I'd recommend you do once you enter that exam, and of course this weekly question on Monday. All right, first thing, write down the key. Now in class we had a go at we did this together, so you can see this Drisner traders. This particular question's in the Hoang text, and it's a brilliant starting point for us. Right, so we were able to get a clear vision of what a decision tree is. In this case, we're looking at just 2 options. Okay, so this business is considering, it's an Australian business, it's considering 2 locations to operate from or move to. So you can see here Kazakhstan and South Korea. Now you may recall that we did settle on South Korea, and the reason for that is we have to support our argument through the quantitative data that they've given us in a table. Right, so that is very typical in an IB exam. They will provide us with data very similar to this. Okay, it may be in a different structure, but that's to challenge you, of course. But always look out for probability. Okay, that has to be provided to us. And keeping in mind, when we talk about probability, this is an estimate, right? So in a real-world example, if the executive team or a team of that is involved in planning for the future of the business, they will be coming up with these probabilities. Okay, it's not expected that students will come up with these probabilities. All right, just watch for some tricks that the examiners might throw our way in a sense that they might leave out one of these particular values, keeping in mind they must always add up to 1 or 100%. So if it's presented as percentages, this here, this first one, 60, okay, 60%. And let's say they didn't include that 0.4 or 40%, we make the assumption that it must add up to 100 or 1. Right, other things to keep in mind, this is by no mistake where they've got costs/revenues. Okay, now in this table you can see the first value that we see for Kazakhstan is the cost of that particular move, so if the company was considering that. We understand that when we are presenting negative figures essentially it's an accounting principle. If we see a figure in brackets, okay, we expect that figure is a negative, right? So in good practice, I'd like you to include that as well when you are presenting your decision trees or constructing your decision trees. Okay, so anything that's a negative value, include in brackets. Right, so as I mentioned, costs and revenues, by no mistake, we see them categorized together, because the next value we see, this 400,000, is considered to be a revenue. So the likelihood, the probability of a high return is 60%, right? And the expected or predicted revenue that would be attributed to that would be $400,000 in this case. All right. Same applies with the low return, probability of a low return occurring of 40%, and then the expected revenue return of $250,000. All right. Okay, so you can see here the finished product. We went through this in class. Always working from left to right when we are dealing with decision trees. Right, so you can see here very consistent around the decision node and the chance nodes here. Right, and we can see here these values that we see, keeping in mind that's part of our calculation process, and these numbers, these figures, naturally are provided to us. okay, they're provided to us in the table, right? Okay. Some other things to keep in mind. So I meant to say these figures down the middle here, right? So it's just the way they've set this up. Look, when you are working through these, you'll see the answer. If you're checking out the answers once you've actually drawn it up yourself, they're all presented in slightly different ways. Okay, so just keep that in mind as well, right? Okay, so what I'm going to jump to next, I know most of us had a chance to complete this particular question in class. It's one I love in a sense. We've got three options to consider. We are dealing with a slightly different scenario here where we're looking at, you can see economic growth, we can see our probabilities down the middle presented as percentages, and then our expected return in US dollars. All right. Again, by no mistake, we see for Japan, I'll just bring this up so you can see it properly. For Japan, in terms of economic growth, we can see an improvement in the economy, an unchanged situation in the economy, and then a worsening of the economy. Certainly the return in this case is considered to be a negative 2 million, okay, negative 2 million US dollars. All right, so that certainly isn't an error, but please watch for that when they do present you with the data. Other things we see here, costs in this case are now presented at the end of the table, whereas in the previous question we saw costs and revenues were grouped together. Okay, so it's really just taking the time to read, interpret what's in front of us. Okay, so it will be very similar in nature to what we see in these two questions. Right. Okay, so we saw the finished product once again. What's missing in these particular answers in the mark scheme here is there's no working for us. So I'd love to see that. Look, of course, when you are doing this in class, you will be expected to show all of your working. Okay, all of your working. Okay, terrific. So this is where everyone had a chance to attempt this in class. The group I saw this morning online, certainly I did encourage you as well to have a go at this particular question. Okay, it's a good challenge, or I would say that first one is on the easier side when it comes to decision trees. This one's about middle range. And now I'm going to show you quite an extensive question, if you like. Great. Now we can see here this is a sample IB question. This popped up in the November 2019 exam in paper 2. And it posed a significant challenge, and you can imagine that students would have found this relatively difficult, especially initially looking at this and thinking, wow, this looks different to what I'm used to. So taking your breath, working through it slowly, and you'll see here it isn't actually as bad as it seems. So I'll just give you a moment to reread the case if you haven't seen this before. The one thing, just please ignore capacity utilisation at this point. It's not important to us. It comes later in the course in Unit 5, so that's something that's not examinable in the upcoming exam. Excellent. Okay, we'll resume. Now you can see in terms of structure-wise, you'll see again a very similar structure to what you face in your Week 8 exams and of course this IB question that you'll face on Monday. Short case to start with. Now this is a partnership, keeping in mind, and they're considering some strategic changes. We also need to factor in predictions around the economy. Right now, it doesn't tell us any more than these. Simply that, it's a prediction. Right? So the economy, they expect the economy to either improve or stay the same. I had a very astute question the other day where someone asked, well, what if it worsens? Right? Well, in this case, we're just under the prediction that it will improve or stay the same. It won't get any worse. All right? So you don't have to deal with whether it gets any worse. So you can see here the probability of the economy staying the same is 0.3. Right? That again would have thrown a few people because usually we see the probability actually listed in the table. So we will make the assumption, and we have to do this, we make that connection, that if the economy was to improve, right, it would be 0.7. Right? So it must all add up to 1, naturally, 0.7 being 70%, 0.3 being 30%. Okay? Right. Now, again, taking your time, making sure you are getting the structure right is important. we can see we're facing three options, all right? Always starting with your decision node, okay, is very important. And then we start to work across from left to right, dealing with option one first. Okay, so option one, keeping in mind the costs is 200,000. So we're going to actually write that into our in brackets on our decision tree. It's easier if you visualize this in a moment, so I will put it on the screen, don't worry. You can see here the cost applicable to option one is 200,000. Option two, there was no cost, and the reason for that is the partners, and when they say dissolve the partnership, it just means shut down the partnership, or dissolving is essentially the shutting down aspect of the partnership, and selling off the brand name itself. All right, so no cost involved, but there is still an expected revenue return, okay, through the sale of the SASE brand. Okay. Right, other things to interpret when we look at option three, it's now split up into A and B, right? So just watch for that. It poses that added challenge, yes, okay, but we've got another chance node that we need to consider. And again, I will show you this so you can visualize it in a second. Now, this is very important. We can see it's talking about the legal costs of becoming a private limited company, right? So whether or not they choose option A or B, or consider option A and B, it's going to cost them 150,000 in legal costs, okay, to simply become a private limited company, right? Now we can see here if they do choose to stay with the current product range, so not add any other products, it's not going to cost them anything more on top of this 150,000, right? So there's no additional cost that we need to factor in for 3A. When we look at 3B though, we can see here there's an additional cost of 170,000. Now, why? Well, we can see here that they're developing a new product range. So you can imagine as part of that development process, certainly the costs around research and development really factors in here. So we need to keep in mind that for our branch 3B on our decision tree, we have to add in our $170,000 of additional costs in addition to this, the legal costs. Okay. Right, let's get underway. So the rest is given to us in the expected revenues. Again, all based on predictions. Okay. Right, so I'll bring up my version because I must admit the answer version is again a little overwhelming if you're not across this. Okay. So how about, I'm just going to move myself for a minute up here and make sure you can all see this as well. I'll make this a little larger in a second. Great. Now, what you see on the screen, the first thing I did this under a time limit as well because it's important. You will need to spend, because this, let's say in an exam, this might be worth 5 marks. You'd be spending around the 10 to 12 minutes. It might take you slightly longer, but keep that in mind. Anywhere we usually work off about 2 minutes per mark, okay, 2 minutes per mark, roughly, right? So what we see, option one, first of all, I've just put some little titles up the top to help myself, really, okay? You know, they're not absolutely essential, but you can do that if it helps. Now, the first thing, we see that option one, we had a $200,000 cost, right? Then we reach our chance node here. Okay, so we understand we've got 0.7 being the improvement in the economy, 0.3 for it remaining the same, and the expected revenues we were given. So all I've done here is transfer that information from the table, put it down as my expected revenue. Okay, I've done the same for 0.3, which was the economy remaining the same. That was the expected revenue. This step in the middle is consistent with what we went through in class. It's just that extra working out to help you visualize what's actually happening. Now, you can do all these calculations in one. So all of those calculations can be done to calculate expected outcome. If you're comfortable doing that, that's fine, as long as you show your working out process. I like to include this extra step in the middle so I know I haven't gone wrong, I haven't missed anything. I find it helps me. Right. So you can see here, it's just some simple maths here, 0.7 multiplied by 300,000, we're left with this 210, and the same applies here, 0.3 multiplied by 250,000. Okay, so I went ahead and I did all these calculations, and then I jumped to option 2. Now, I'll just take you back to the question for a second. We understand with option 2, that's the tricky one because there's no cost, but there's an expected revenue. There's also no consideration of whether the economy improves or stays the same. We don't have to consider that because we're actually selling the brand, selling the SASE brand name. It's okay. So if we have a look once again at my answer here, it is perfectly fine just to draw a straight line. Option 2, zero cost, $150,000 in expected revenue, and then the expected outcome again is going to remain as $150,000. There's nothing else we need to deal with option 2. Okay. Right. Option 3. Right. So we can see here with option 3, we understand this $150,000 is relating to the legal costs, right? So the legal cost, irrespective if they consider A or B. Now, if it helps you, you can draw some labels in if you wish, right? So with option 1, you might choose to write in increased production capacity. Option 2, you could just write in sell. Option 3, becoming a private limited company. If that helps you, by all means, put it in. Okay. Now, working across once again, we can see here, because we've got 3A and 3B to consider, we need another decision node. We're making a decision between each of those subcategories A and B. Okay, so decision node followed by a chance node, and again we see this 0.7.3. 0.7.3 comes up again, right? Keeping in mind there's no additional costs to 3A. Yes, it's going to cost $150,000 to become a private limited company, so the legal fees, but there's no additional cost because they're not offering any further products in their range. Right, so again, some simple calculations, and we can see here that we end up with these particular values. Part of the working out process, part of the process of coming towards our expected outcome or our expected monetary value means the same thing. Okay, so the two terms, expected outcome or EMV stands for expected monetary value. Okay, they both mean exactly the same thing. All right, so just taking you back once again, our final option here, 3B, we understand the additional cost of $170,000. So we're going to deal with that later, and that's why they're both in brackets. Okay, they're both considered, both written in brackets. Again, I've gone through the process, done my calculations and working. Here they are. Okay, almost there. So our last part, we can see our expected outcomes. What have I done here? Okay, in very simple terms, I will show you. So when we are calculating our expected outcome for this particular option, we need to add these two together. Okay, so 210 plus our 75,000, right? And then we take away. We must take away, this is often forgotten by students, we must take away our initial cost of option 1, okay, our predicted cost for option 1, right? So what that will leave us with is our expected monetary value or our expected outcome of $85,000, right? Good, so EMV2, so expected monetary value for the second option is $150,000. Right, we mentioned that before. We don't need to split it up as we have done for option 1. So that's our EMV for option 2. Last bit, option 3, really consistent, nice and neat. Try to be as neat as possible. I'm not very neat in terms of my handwriting, but this again, I did this under time pressure as you would. 154,000 plus your 51. Where have they come from? We need to add these two values together. Add them together. Right. We see here we need to take away, we need to factor in this initial legal cost of 150,000, right? So that's where that 150's come from. We end up with 55,000, and our last option here, again adding these two together, 385,000 plus our 135,000, and then we take away our our costs of not only those legal costs, but the additional 170,000 in costs for option 3B, right? So that's where, if you're wondering where's this 320 come from, it's just simply this 150,000 plus our 170,000 together. There it is, okay. Right, and what's the outcome? Well, our expected monetary value for 3B is 200,000. All right, now working back through, for our expected outcomes, we're looking for the highest value, and the highest value in this case is clearly 200,000 out of all the options. All right, what do? I like to circle it. I like to finish my answer with, therefore, option B has the highest expected outcome. And last point, so you don't lose any marks, is go back through and put your double lines through the rejected options. Okay, so I've rejected option 1, option 2, and option 3A. Yeah? Great, so you can see my key down the bottom. That's the first thing I draw in as I face one of these questions. Okay, the very first thing. Okay, so hopefully that helps everybody there. Now, if you are looking back, I'll show you again. This is where people become a little bit overwhelmed in class, because we pulled up the answers, and this is how they've drawn it up. This is the IB, by the way. So I find that a little bit confusing and overwhelming. These letters are fine. That's quite consistent. So if you'd like to draw those letters in, I'd encourage you to do so. It's not going to cost you any marks or earn you any marks, but correctly, we can see A, B. So it's just the order that we're dealing with. Okay, so we can see here that's the decision node. Then we're dealing with B, then C, then D and E. Okay, so if you'd like to do that, by all means do it. Right, some other things to take note of. So they've used brackets here for this option. We know there's no cost here, but that's a little bit confusing how they put the 150,000 here. I don't particularly like that myself. You can see the 200,000 here. In terms of consistency, I guess it doesn't visually. It's not as, I guess, appealing in terms of trying to figure it out, especially when we're learning decision trees. It's a little bit more difficult to visualize it from this answer that we see on the screen. Okay, now their calculations are down the bottom. If you feel in the exam that you've run out of space, just do the EMVs or just the expected outcomes underneath. All right, as long as it's nice and neat, as long as you include this. If you just give us these answers, 85, 55, and 200 and the likes, that's not enough. All right, so it will cost marks. All right, so please show all your working out. Okay, great. So that's about as hard as it gets in terms of those questions. So please practice. There's many different questions that I've included with answers as well. Okay, in that presentation. All right, you've all got a copy of this. All right. And the last little part I need to show you is what to expect for this Monday IB question. All right. So it is going to have a quantitative focus, and what I'm going to bring up on the screen, this is not a decision tree, what I'm going to show you, but it's a quantitative based or a quantitative focused question from section A in paper 2. All right. So section A in paper 2 is always a 10-mark question that we'll face. Right, so I'll bring that up now. So that's not it, sorry. Just go there. Here we are. Okay, so this is the question here. It's based around break even. All right, so I know we haven't got there in the course yet. We're only in the very early stages of our course, but you can see here in terms of structure for a quantitative focused question, you've got a short case study. You will be given a table of data that you'll have to interpret, and then you'll have a series of questions that follow. All right, now you'll see here, construct a fully labeled break-even chart, and that's worth 4 marks. So for a decision tree, it's pretty typical for it to be worth anywhere between 5 and 6 marks. All right. You see there's some other questions that either before you even draw anything, you'll have a question or 2 questions to attempt. So in this case, describing one feature of a cooperative, not too difficult, worth 2 marks. On Monday, for the IB question, you you may be faced with something very similar. So it could be a 2-mark question to start, and it will be based on anything that we've covered, any of the topics that we've covered in term 1 only. All right, so 1.2, 1.3, 1.5, 1.6, and 1.7. Okay, so it could be on partnerships, it could be on types of organisations, it could be on external growth. Right, so expect at least a 2-mark question to begin. Right, the next part, what you can expect is, yes, there will be some form of decision tree question. All right, some sort of quantitative based question with calculations. So, what I can tell you is you may be asked to construct a decision tree, or there might be a partially constructed decision tree, and you'll have to finish it off and then comment about the results as well. Okay, so that's the format that you will expect. Right, you can also be provided with a decision tree, a completed decision tree in IB exams, and then again there might be a series of questions that follows. Right, so they're the types of formats that you may see. And the last one, generally there's a question that to conclude, it might be a 2-marker, it might be a 3-marker, and that will be related to the case study, right? It may be related to the decision tree, but expect that there will be a final question to follow, right? Fantastic. So I hope that makes it very clear in your mind what to expect for Monday. The last thing I wanted to show you, I'm going to bring to you to our brilliant InThinking resource, which I use regularly, as you know, but I encourage you to have a look at it. If you're not a regular user, it's fantastic. So, if decision trees just aren't fitting well with you at the moment, or it's just a little bit muddled in your mind, there's some great practice type questions. So I like the worked example that they've got here on InThinking. I've also included an additional resource on our class page. Now it's not an IB resource, but it's a great one because, again, if I just flip through, it shows us step by step how to construct a decision tree. Okay. Now, what I love about this presentation, in fact, we'll go through this right now, is some of the limitations of a decision tree. Now, what are those limitations? Well, we can see here that it is based on numerical information and it's based on predictions. Right? So that can be certainly a limiting factor. Now, probabilities and net outcomes or expected revenues, they're all predictions. Right? They're all predictions as part of that decision tree. It doesn't mean it's going to happen for certain. Now, in terms of, we can see here if there's a major change in the economy or a natural disaster or a pandemic, you can see here that certainly those predictions just simply go out the window, don't they? So that can be one of the real limitations of a decision tree. It's quite static in its nature. Okay. Right. Some other things. So you can read through those limitations there. There is also some brilliant limitations on InThinking. So if you scroll right to the bottom, there we are. So some of the disadvantages of using decision trees. Okay. Now I did mention this in class. It's a great tool, yes, but it's not the only tool that should be used by businesses to actually make that decision. Okay. It involves numerical data and quantitative data, but it doesn't factor in any form of qualitative elements. Right. So that's certainly a key weakness or disadvantage. Okay. Again, it reiterates about being predictions and forecasts here. Okay. And the last one, for very complex decisions, right, it can be very difficult to construct a tree. All right, we've found it is quite a difficult task to actually even draw some of the simpler decision trees here. So it does become quite a complex task for businesses to be able to not only draw them up but interpret them. There is many advantages, of course, as well. So that's why it's part of the course. It's a very useful planning tool. Okay? It's a planning tool for businesses. You can see here it helps managers to really visualise any of the risks that are involved with particular projects, especially if they're weighing up two projects side by side. It's a great way to identify any risks. And you can see the last one. It is a flexible organisational planning tool that can be applied to many different situations. Probably thinking, well, how what's an example of that? This one's a pretty cool example. It's a simple one, but let's have a look at it. This one is talking about Bob's farm, right? So in, I guess, a different sort of context, this farmer is looking at whether to plant lettuce or whether to plant strawberries side by side, right? So he's predicted that there's a 0.6 chance or 60% chance of a good crop, as opposed to 40% chance of a bad one, right? And these are the profits that will be attributed to a good and a bad crop. Same applies with strawberries. Okay, so you can see here, we've drawn it all up. We haven't shown the calculations, unfortunately, again, but I've included those calculations just down the bottom here for you to interpret. Okay. Terrific. All right, I hope that gives you some guidance. Thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to your results next week.